Welcome. This is the Massage Therapy Journal Club. I'm Chris Moyer, and I'm here with Mark Olson. And what a coincidence, Mark. I see you have your sunglasses on just like I do. Why is that?
Oh, it's so bright and hot here. Actually, let me open the window a little more. It's so hot.
Yeah, I have the window open here too, here in Denver. It was about 60 degrees this afternoon. And tell me again where you're coming from?
I'm in Kauai. Yeah, it's in the 70s here, of course.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so I mean, I don't think our friends out east or up in Canada will be at all upset with us for enjoying this kind of weather and needing to protect our eyes from the bright sunlight.
I would hope not, no.
Yeah, yeah. And you're wearing short sleeves, right, Mark? Like
Oh,
me?
yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, all the time.
Okay. Well, good, good. I'm glad we've established that. Now that we know that you're in Kauai, let me say a little bit. Well, now I need to read, so I'm going to put my regular glasses on, even though it's pretty bright.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
me too.
all right. So, Mark is the current director of the Pacific Center for Awareness and Bodywork in Kauai. That is one of the major islands of Hawaii, and that is the westernmost school on planet Earth. And in addition to that, he also has a PhD in neuroscience from University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Interesting coincidence, that's also where my PhD is from. And undoubtedly, you and I were on campus for part of the same time,
Hmm.
uh, but we didn't know each other then. We just
Yeah,
found out later. Yeah, so you and I have, we've probably ridden the bus together and stuff like that and never knew
probably.
it. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
So tell our audience a little bit uh, about what you do.
Well, like I said, I'm a director of massage school here, and for a long time that was kind of an interesting thing, like neuroscience on one hand and massage school on the other. Uh, I think for some people that's a very odd combination, but for me it's a very, very natural combination since we're working on the skin and the nervous system. So uh, I think life goes in ways that you don't necessarily predict, and I certainly wouldn't have ever guessed that I would be bringing neuroscience into the massage world when I was in grad school. But here I am now, and that's what we do. We definitely integrate a lot of neuroscience into the program.
Excellent. Well, we selected a study today that is a study in psychology and in behavior, and it's not exactly neuroscience because they didn't get into what's happening in the nervous system, although I'm sure we can imagine ways to connect it to neuroscience. And you and I both talked in the lead up to this about how we both have some interest in seeing massage therapy, the profession, and people who are interested in massage therapy research start to think a little bit more expansively about what research applies. And so we're looking at a study today entitled Haptically Linked Dyads, Are Two Motor Control Systems Better Than One? If you're just seeing this video now, you can get the link to this article from my Patreon site. It is a very short article about a very simple study in basic science. And let's just review what they did in this study and then see if it connects to massage therapy in any kind of theoretical way. Would you like to begin describing what they did, or would you
Sure.
prefer that I do
Yeah,
that?
no, I
Okay.
can do that. So you had two individuals who were sitting across from each other with a curtain between them, so they could see each other. I mean, they could hear each other, but they couldn't see each other, or they were told not to make any noise or talk. And they were both controlling a wheel, the same wheel, and the object of the task was to move an arrow into a particular location that would appear it was being projected with a projector. Almost every second, there was a new location that they had to move to.
And I'm just gonna add a little
Yeah.
detail. So this wheel is like it's like attached to the table in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And like I visualize it as being like a bicycle crank almost, where there's
Mm-hmm.
two arms. Okay, and the
Yep.
curtain is dividing it right down the middle, so that each person has effectively a pedal, if it was a bicycle crank,
Mm-hmm.
that they can hold, but they can't see each other, and they've been asked not to communicate.
Yeah. 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 And
Okay.
so then every second there's a new um, goal being set. They have to move the crank over to reach the goal. And most of the time, that means that they're going to be going in the opposite direction that they went to last time, because they only have a half circle to work with. So they go one direction one time and then the other direction the other time, most of the time. And they're both going for the same goal. So one person sees the projected arrow, the other person sees it 180 degrees on the other side. So they're both going for the same kind of rotation. They're not working against each other in terms of the goal state, same goal state. Anything else you would add to that description?
No, I mean, I think that's a good description. And so we're talking about the fact that these people are linked mechanically and they're trying to do the same thing, even though the only channel through which they could potentially communicate, if we want to call it that, is through the crank itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then in addition to that, these subjects, they participated in more than one trial. So sometimes they were doing it themselves. The other person on the side of the curtain was instructed not to operate the crank. And then other times they were linked together through the crank, so that there are conditions in which an individual is the only person operating the crank and other conditions in which they were jointly operating the crank, right?
Yes, and those were appropriately randomized, so it wasn't always one sequence or the other. That was well done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this study is really an excellent example if we wanted to sort of teach maybe undergrads in terms of research design, randomization, all that sort of thing. When you do laboratory science like this, you have so much control to make sure all those things are in place. Whereas more often when we see applied research, they're doing massage therapy research in a hospital, let's say, mm-hmm. It's for practical reasons, it's often a lot harder to have that kind of experimental control. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so they do this, and the thing that they're trying to see is whether there's any performance difference between the two conditions. In other words, do people operate this crank faster or more accurately, or both of those things, when they're doing it by themselves versus when they are doing it with a partner who is only linked to them through the crank? They haven't been able to strategize. They can't talk to each other. There's no way for them to communicate something like, hey, you're slowing me down, like loosen your grip so I can, I'm really good at this. Let me take the lead. There's no possibility of doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens?
Well, they find that the pairs do a better job on average than the individuals by themselves. But what's really interesting about that is that most people report that they expected the opposite result, because they found that the motor output of the other person was interfering with what they were trying to accomplish. So most of them, at least they said most of them, found this experience of conflict, like the other person's getting in the way and they're slowing me down. And but the results show that they performed statistically better together than they did separately.
Yeah, so the pairs perform better, and despite the data being clear that the paired condition is significantly faster than the individual condition, when the subjects are asked, how did you experience it? They say, well, if anything, the paired condition felt, slower and less precise to me. So what do you think when you read that?
Yeah, well, there's a number of things. My first thought was, well, I think, we're set up to notice what things aren't going, according to our plan. Like when we have a certain way of doing things and it's not doing it that way, we notice that difference, that error. And we may not notice what's actually going well, what's going correctly. I do think it might be possible that they perform the task better because they experienced that conflict, maybe. Maybe they felt like, oh gosh, this person's a real loser, so I better really get on it and like take care of all this, fix this thing because this person's messing it up. I mean, they might be more on task because they feel like they have to sort of make up for the other person's way of doing things. I don't know, but just a thought that I had. Yeah, that's one thing.
And then one other wrinkle to the results that was really interesting, and when this study was published a little over 10 years ago, I was thinking about massage therapy research back then, and I was just fascinated by this detail, which is not only did the pairs perform better, despite their belief that they probably didn't, but when the researchers analyzed the pattern of force being delivered by the pairs, it appeared that the pairs subconsciously developed a cooperative strategy for getting this task done. That when they looked at the force applied to each side of the crank, within just a few actions, one person was taking more responsibility for accelerating the crank at the beginning of a trial, and the other person implicitly started taking more responsibility for braking the crank as it approached the target.
Yeah.
What do you think? So what does the neuroscientist in you think when you see that?
Yeah, well, my first question I have to ask is, how many people did that? Because they didn't report how many people actually did that, which is unfortunate because it's that's like the most interesting part of the whole paper.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to know what percentage of people did it that way, and if they always stuck to that, who was the starter and who was the slower downer. But assuming that was happening most of the time, and I also am curious whether that would have happened if the task had been not as quick. Because the task was happening about every second. So maybe there's a strategy that occurs where the person with the fastest reaction time, they're moving, and the other person is coming in there and saying, oh my gosh, I got to slow you down right away. Or not. Maybe they've simply just learned by interacting with each other without conscious awareness that there's one person's taking a role and the other person's not, which, if that's the case, it's really fascinating.
So I'd like to really highlight something you just said there, because you and I, as people who've studied behavioral science at a high level, you and I sort of very easily are able to think about learning as being able to be a conscious process and also as a non-conscious process.
Yeah.
But maybe for people who haven't studied as much psychology, that might not be an easy thing to accept so readily. That for most people, learning is like something you do consciously. You know what you've learned, you can report what you've learned. But let's make sure, can you say a little bit more about the possibility of learning something that you're not aware of?
Yeah, well, so when people talk about memory, most people are talking about what's called declarative memory, where you know the capital of France and how many nerves there are in the spinal cord or something like that. And that those are declarative things that people have conscious awareness of. But there's also procedural memory, like riding a bicycle. And those things happen without conscious awareness. At first, you might think about things consciously to learn it, but ultimately it becomes a non-conscious process. And all skill learning is that way. If you look at amnesics who damage the hippocampus, they aren't able to remember what happened 5 minutes ago, but they can learn a skill, like they can learn how to play chess, or they can learn how to play basketball, and they get better and better at it, even if they don't even remember ever playing it before. So skill learning is generally something that happens without conscious awareness, and this is a skill learning task. And these individuals are learning a skill where they have to coordinate with another individual. So evidently that coordination somehow is a non-conscious process. I was kind of thinking it's a lot like when people are dancing together. And after a while, they just kind of learn to be able to map or predict the other person's movements.
Right.
Not happening on a conscious level.
So let's see if we think that this relates to massage therapy at all, because I'm so interested in this possibility that is a channel for communication. And I want to be 100% clear here. I mean, anyone who knows me and interacts with me online knows on certain theories is. I don't think there's anything supernatural or magical about what happens in massage therapy. I'm fascinated by transcendent experiences. I think it's incredible that you can be getting a massage, or I'm going to assume you can be giving a massage and have the feeling that something, beyond awareness or something really transformational is happening. But as a scientist, I'm confident that that can be explained through, natural mechanisms. So a study like this shows us that it's at least possible that a kind of communication can occur through touch. What are your thoughts about that possibility happening in massage and during massage?
Yeah. Well, clearly, I mean, massage is a little different from this task, because in this task, people are working on something toward a similar goal. And that isn't usually the case in massage therapy. But the general idea that something's happening below the conscious level, haptically, and if it can happen with two active pairs, it could certainly happen with a pair where they're not working toward a goal. I mean, I think it reminds me of a lot of the ideomotor tasks where people get around a Ouija board and they feel like somebody is speaking to them, but that's happening not necessarily haptically, but it's happening through the motor system because of subconscious ideas that are running into the motor system.
So let's make sure people understand exactly what we're saying. So first of all, the term that you mentioned, ideomotor, I'm going to spell that out in case anyone wants to look it up. That's Ideomotor, ideomotor. Can you say a little bit at a more basic level what you mean by that term?
Yeah, so let's say that you're trying to make a decision about whether to go to Hawaii or not. And so you put a Ouija board in front of you and you put your hand on it, and there's a part of you that really wants to say yes, even though you may consciously say no, I have work to do, I can't do that. But the part of you that wants to say yes might have this influence, and you might not even be aware of that part once it wants to say yes. So it can direct your motor movements without you really recognizing you don't recognize the conscious output of that motor movement. It still directs the motor activity nonetheless. So because you're not aware of the conscious motor activity, you perceive it moving, the logical conclusion is that I'm not doing it. Obviously something else is. Somebody wants me to go to Hawaii. That's the conclusion you might draw. So that's what an ideomotor is. And this also reminds me of instances when people are waking up and they're not yet able to move, but they're conscious. And so a lot of times what the brain does with that interpretation is it feels like someone's holding it down.
Huh.
So sometimes people, when they wake up, they have this experience of feeling like they're being held down because they're not able to move even though they're awake. And in the past, people have attributed that to demons and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of room here for what happens when we're not exactly aware of all that's going on haptically and with motor output.
Yeah, and the mind searches for an explanation. So taking your Ouija board example, and it's interesting that you introduced it as an individual using a Ouija board, whereas the traditional way is for two people at least to be doing it. And maybe we'll circle back around to talk about the relevance of that. So ideomotor action, it's like given the room to happen, assuming there's no conscious processes that are interfering with it, this sort of subconscious process can drive behavior in such a way that the person is almost mystified by it, and they're left asking what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And our natural human inclination is to come up with an explanation, even if that explanation is, oh, the spirit world is doing this, or, oh, I can't move from my sleep state because, a demon is preventing me from moving, in the example of sleep paralysis. And for people watching this, for whom this is a new concept, speaking again as scientists, I think you're going to agree with me, Mark, this is a very well accepted phenomenon that under the right conditions, the body is capable of purposeful motion that is not being directed by conscious awareness. Would you agree with how I phrased that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. And then in the case of, a Ouija board being operated by two people, not only can it happen, but there can be a kind of implicit cooperation. So you and I ask the Ouija board the same question, and if we rule out supernatural explanations, which I will do, and I'm confident you would do too, the only explanation left is that ideomotor action, including enough correlation between your ideomotor action and mine, gives us a result.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think that this kind of thing happens in massage therapy under any conditions where the therapist and the recipient are linking in this way?
I don't have an example that comes to mind directly in a massage session. Definitely have this sense that there's something here to find, to link to. We do an exercise in my program called assisted stretching, although it has nothing to do with stretching. I don't know why we call it that. Where a person is lying on the floor and they're just simply told to move in however way they feel like moving, just slight movements, and maybe not even move, just to allow for whatever to happen. And the practitioner is told then to pay close attention to any little bit of movement, and then to just move that person's limb or head or whatever in whatever way they notice that it seems like that body wants to move. The phrase "wants to move."
Yeah.
And then what happens is that this dance sort of occurs, and the practitioner, if they're paying really close attention to the client and not imposing their ideas on them, creates these movements that seem to the client to feel like, wow, I don't know how that happened. It seemed like I was just moving without even trying, or like you weren't even doing anything, or you were predicting what I was going to do, or a lot of interesting comments come out of that. In addition to interesting psychological processes that occur from that, there's a difficulty in determining who's moving who and what's going first, and that sort of thing, which I think is similar in this experiment. Now, that's not something that we do in a massage. However, maybe something like it.
So this technique you just described, you use this as a learning technique in your academy?
Yeah, well, it's a good technique for tracking a client and learning not to impose one's own agenda onto somebody. But it's also a way for the client to sort of allow whatever they need to do or feel, because sometimes people have movements that they're holding back on, they're inhibiting, and so there's a psychological piece to that. That's a whole other topic.
That is so interesting, because it reminds me of, I am not trained in hypnosis. I think all of us who've studied psychology to some degree are going to find it to be an interesting phenomenon. And I know that some people go way, way too far with it. I'm skeptical about people who make grandiose claims for it. But the basic phenomenon of it is amazing.
Yeah.
And when I was doing my clinical training, I can't remember why I did this, but I did have occasion with a patient to do not full hypnosis, but to do a steps hypnosis where I asked the person to, relax and close their eyes. And I said a few things that were sort of suggestive, like you ask the person to hold out their hands, and you invite them to imagine that their hands are getting lighter and lighter and filling with helium, something like that. And the person sitting there, depending on the type of person they are and how suggestible they are, their arms start to rise and things like this. And I've thought about, the thing that you were just describing sounds very much like that. You're sort of creating a space in which the person could engage in suggestive behavior or ideomotor action. And sometimes that happens. Now, have you noticed that some people do this much more readily than others? I'm going to bet you have.
Well, some people certainly are more inclined to roll with it, but it doesn't really take much to kind of get the snowball rolling, really. And what that ends up looking like certainly varies quite a bit from person to person, and probably day to day for each person. But there's usually a pretty common experience across everyone that there's something really interesting or significant about that exercise. That is kind of, I can't think of the word, but hard to put your finger on, hard to put words to.
So do you think that there's a conceptual link between massage therapy and hypnosis?
Conceptual link between them? Well, I certainly think that there are tools in hypnosis which can be very useful for contacting the client and helping them feel heard and cared for, and in mirroring body language. I mean, those things, if I mirror my client's body language, they're going to feel more heard. They're going to feel more open. You can do the same thing if you're trying to sell somebody something and mirror. That's what car salesmen do. They'll mirror your words and they'll mirror your body gestures and feel more comfortable buying the car as a result. So
that's an interesting example you gave there, because it on the surface those things sound so unlike each other. I mean, massaging someone versus selling someone a car,
right?
Are just so opposite, and yet they do. I think that what you're describing is a basic feature they have in common, which is persuasion.
Yeah, or just making someone feel more at ease and less reactive and on guard. Yeah.
Interesting. So Mark, I'm going to go ahead and have a little laugh at about this. When I invited Mark to discuss this article with me, I was kind of like, I don't have a specific point or set of points that I want to make. I've kind of always been interested in this study, and it's been a jumping off point for some things that I've tended to think about. And Mark is like, yeah, I'm totally on board with that. Let's see where that goes. And right now, as I'm like, Mark, do you think there's any link between hypnosis and massage? I'm laughing to myself because I'm wondering if inside you're like, what the hell did I get myself into? Where is he taking this conversation?
No, not at all. I mean, our program uses quite a bit of tools from hypnosis. For the reason that I just described, for making better contact with the client, but not to, within the scope of practice. So for me, there's lots of connections, but the way that you asked it, I don't know if I would say, what's the connection between massage and hypnosis? I don't know.
Well, let me maybe make it more basic. So, our personal frameworks can be such a good jumping off point for ideas. They're maybe not the best basis for actual science, but in terms of thinking about things, they're good for that. Okay, so I love to have what might be called, hypnotic experiences or transcendent experiences. Um, at the same time, I've sort of learned that they don't come easily for me. I can see in some other people who I envy, they come really easily. And going back to hypnosis as an example, I would love to be hypnotized. I would be fascinated. I don't seem to be able to do it. I score very low on index of suggestibility. And even though I want to do it, I can never come close to doing it. And I've tried to do it with people who are trained in hypnosis. But I've had experiences in life that are sort of transcendent and almost a little trippy, to use sort of a casual term for it. And massage has been one of those. That if I get a massage that's really, really good, the sensation that I can get from that is almost a little otherworldly. And you know what I mean.
For sure.
And so I wonder if I'm having an experience there that is almost akin to hypnosis. And then when I add in kind of the thing that this study looked at, that there's some linkage happening through touch, I wonder if those really amazing sessions of massage therapy, if there's sort of if there's something happening between the person who's delivering it and the person who's receiving it that is that way, that's hypnotic, that is dependent on ideomotor action, where it almost feels like the person anticipates what your body wants to do, or they're connecting with you in a way that feels like, to use an explanation so many other people like to use, that their energy is melding with yours, that sort of thing. So go ahead. What do you think about that?
Well, so I need to make a disclaimer. When I said that we use some of these tools, that probably could be very misconstrued by a number of people. So what I'm talking about is, like the way one speaks, how the tone of voice and the pacing of one's voice. So if I say like, okay, get really relaxed right now, have lie down on the table, and you just feel really, like, that's not going to be relaxing because of pace and because of tone, and the nervous system responds to certain kinds of paces. So that's auditory, and that's from hypnosis. And the same thing here with what you're talking about with massage, is you're suggesting that there's a kind of communication going on that's not verbal, it's not auditory, it's tactile and haptic. That does occur, and it needs to occur with certain kinds of spacing and pacing and pressure changes that aren't too abrupt. And it's a kind of communication, I would say.
Yeah. And then you read things on the forums about people talking about bad energy or things like that. And, maybe what's happening in those instances is, one of the two people, let's say the therapist, maybe what's happening in that case is the therapist is in a bad frame of mind. Things that are going on in their life are not positive or whatever. And even though they don't come into the session and, verbally declare, oh, my life's a mess, maybe there's something about the quality of their touch that in this haptic, subconscious way communicates stress or communicates discomfort, such that the recipient, just like, they feel something's wrong, and then they're searching for, like, why do I feel this way? And they come up with a supernatural explanation, because what else are you going to come up with?
Yeah. Well, in the assisted stretching exercise that I described, if the therapist makes the client's body move in a way that isn't the way that person really wants to move, that feels very jarring and invasive, and really unpleasant. But you wouldn't notice it. It looks fine, but there's a mismatch between the two motor outputs. It doesn't feel right. So kind of similar to this study, where there's a mismatch between what the two motor outputs are trying to go for, and that doesn't, that they're aware of it. At least the one person's aware of it.
What do they say? how do they report being aware of it when you do this exercise and then you ask them? What do they say?
Well, if they say they'll feel violated, or that the person doesn't care, or that they're being like forced to do something they didn't want to do, or whereas if the outputs match, then it feels very transcendent for many, or very freeing, or the words like that are often described in a positive massage therapy session. So yeah, I think there's something there with a matching when the therapist and the client are able to create the same map together and follow that map, even though they can't describe it in words. I think that creates something that's experienced positively.
Do you find that this exercise, are potential therapists able to get better at that by practicing it?
I would say so. Okay. For sure, because there's a feedback loop. If we just do it once, they're not going to get better. But the feedback loop, and the person says afterwards, "Hey, when you lifted my arm that way, that's not at all what I wanted." They might say, I wasn't sure, I had a sense, or, oh gosh, I had no idea. I mean, they can learn, again, probably subconsciously, but maybe some consciously, depending on what they had certain thoughts in their mind. We don't do that exercise multiple times to create, I can't really experimentally say, but I would expect that people would perform better and better, just like any massage therapist performs better and better as time goes on, because they learn things that they can't even point to.
And is that, I'm going to guess here that you assume that is a function of the therapist becoming more attuned to just sort of being more centered and more aware of whatever feedback they're getting from the recipient.
Yeah, that might be visual, but that also might be an interoceptive sense in themselves, which is... I
would expect it would. It's interesting you said it could be visual, because my thinking would be that vision would maybe have nothing to do with it, that it would be entirely haptic.
I think it can be any of those senses, but the therapist could feel something that's quote right, or feel not right in themselves, even though they can't point to like what it is. They don't see something, they're not feeling something in their fingertips, but they might be feeling and seeing. It might just be like a sense, a receptive sense.
You should try running a few of those with blindfolds, see if it makes any difference.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do kind of studies like that, where you could see if you could determine who is the therapist, and blindfold studies. What do you think? Can you tell me more about what you're thinking there? Like, how do you imagine that?
Well, I mean, it was just an idea. It was really interesting that you led by saying, it could be visual or it could be this other thing, because what I was thinking right away is like, well, whatever feedback is happening there, I wouldn't expect it to be happening visually. And maybe I'm not, maybe the way this exercise takes place is a little different than the way I'm picturing it in my mind. But, it just seems like it would be taking place through the sense of touch and through that physical linkage. And then I expand that, in my mind. One of the things that I've wanted to do in massage research, and I haven't been able to do it in the last few years when I haven't had a lab of my own, but I would like to do more basic research involving massage. So often we see, there's not a lot of massage therapy research, but the massage therapy research we do see tends to be applied. Tends to be in a treatment setting. It tends to be with people who have a certain condition. It tends to usually mimicking treatment conditions is seen as optimal, and it is sometimes. But I don't think we have people who are coming at it from a basic direction very often, where maybe they say, okay, what if we really isolated a particular variable to see what would happen? And so that might be, skipping important things like hypotheses and stuff, just talking about conditions. What would happen? How would massage be different if a blindfold and static earphones are used so that the only connection between the people is touch.
Mm-hmm.
Or other such things where maybe you use a screen or a specially constructed kind of drape so that there's no way of seeing who you're working on or who's being worked on, those sort of things. I mean, I think there's some really interesting possibilities to isolate variables and see, to use that as a way to try to determine what's actually happening, what the mechanisms for these changes are.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Let's do it.
I'm on board. I'm ready. Hawaii sounds good. We just need the money.
I gotta fly you out here and let's do some research.
We just need the money. So hopefully, someone with bags of money is viewing this and will, want to set up an institute or contribute to your center, and we'll build the neuroscience wing onto it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. So to clarify, you're right. It's not mostly visual in that experiment with assisted stretching. It's haptic, but I think a person could be looking at how the client is moving, and there could be this overall gesture that's occurring, that's kind of emerging. Like, oh, I can see that this person is kind of like slowly growing out like a flower, is gonna bloom or something like that. But they're slowly getting there. So my visual system is kind of, I'm at their arm, but I can kind of see what their whole body is doing. And so I can imagine that this person is kind of doing this dance that's eventually going to make their arm go this other way. So that's where the visual's coming from.
I see.
And so I can create this map about their future movements based on the whole feeling of how they're moving, which has an emotional quality to it. But, I could be thinking, oh, they're blooming like a flower, but I could be totally wrong and they're actually doing something else, and then I blow it. If I stick with my idea and then don't, really pay attention. Yeah.
And this makes me think of something else. I like the way you're describing this, because it's helping me to remember some things I've thought about, which is the conceptual similarities between massage therapy and psychotherapy. So I'm trained as a psychotherapist. I haven't practiced in quite some time now, but it just seems like there's so many parallels there. So, we're talking about something like congruence here. Well, I'm probably not saying exactly the right thing here, but we're the degree to which the therapist and the recipient of therapy are on the same page and are in some kind of communication, go in the same direction, is very much what we're talking about here. And there's probably a sweet spot for that if they were so in unison that they were doing the exact same thing, that might not even be good. And if they're so far apart that they're kind of in opposition to each other, that's probably not going to be good, unless maybe you can work through it and get to a better spot. But there's probably a sweet spot where the therapist is largely aware of how the client or recipient sort of wants, to use the word used earlier, wants to unfold or what the direction they want or need to go in, but also that they're still distinct. They're still their own person. They're still enough out of tune with the person that they can sense the difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, attunement, I would call it.
Yeah. Interesting.
And also leading. You're talking about like the therapist is leading the client a little bit, perhaps.
Say that again. Who's leading?
Well, I mean, I guess it could be either way. The client can be leading and the therapist supporting that. Or, the therapist might have a sense of where that client, needs to go, ought to go, or something like that. Or
yeah, I agree. It probably could be either way, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah. I'm just speculating.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of speculation.
Yeah.
which is good. Which is what I thought we would do. Like I said, I didn't have any plan for exactly what direction we would go in. Well, we've been we've been speculating and here for the better part of about 45 minutes. Maybe why don't we kind of bring it back to a scientific level and conclude by putting our scientist hats back on, or more to make the metaphor better, let's put our white coats back on and maybe conclude by saying something like what we think the strengths and weaknesses of this study are, or saying something like what we think the next logical step might be, or how this might be adapted to something more massage. I mean, any of those.
Okay.
How might we?
Before we do that,
go ahead.
I just want to, if I can, I think it's important to mention something about body maps.
Of course.
Here, I think that a lot of the transcendent experiences could be better understood if we had a better grasp of what body maps are and what's going on. And we're obviously
body map.
Right. So, I mean, most massage students hopefully are learn that their skin is mapped onto the somatosensory cortex. One area is the face, another area is their hands, and that sort of thing. There's maps all over the brain for joint position and in periperipheral space. And the brain is also mapping more than just space and physicality. It's also mapping potential. What's potential? This person is standing in front of me. I might be able to hug them. I could shake their hand. I could do anything. That there's a set of things that I could do that are being mapped, and those mappings can also combine with the somatosensory maps to give a sensation, so that one feels something. So this person is standing next to me, and they're not doing anything. They're not touching me, but I quote feel them because because the potential for them to interact, to make it more salient. The brain, the brain can create whatever experience it wants to, the subjective
Right.
experience. And in this case, well, in many cases, it creates a somatic experience out of something that's really an abstraction or a possibility of action or intention.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the transcendent pieces when we're trying to figure out what's going on in massage is we're doing something to the body maps. We're bringing awareness to it. We're heightening the resolution of them.
Mm-hmm.
Probably all sorts of things, and we're also creating a potential motor space of, well, what are the possible things that the therapist could be doing next, and does it map onto what I'm hoping they do next?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a temporal motor spatial map of some kind, and that's the congruence that we're going for. And so, I mean, we talked about the congruence and the attunement, and I just thought it's important that we talk about the maps, because in this study, we're clearly dealing with maps, motor maps, and figuring out the intentions of the other. Like the other person has some kind of like intentional motor map, and I do, and we're trying to figure out how they work together. And
I'm glad you brought that up, and when we see sometimes how haywire discussions about the explanations for what's happening in massage can go, where we see so many students and practitioners who are wedded to pseudoscientific ideas. We're not going to get everyone trained as a neuroscientist talking about temporal spatial maps the way you just did, but it would be really great if we saw a little bit better awareness of how consciousness is produced, and a little bit more awareness of the kind of thing you just described, where if I'm getting a sensation and I can't put my finger on exactly why I'm getting it, it doesn't mean it's magical. And it means what's happening is my body, my brain, and in turn my body is having an experience based on what I expect might happen, whom I'm in proximity to, what those people are expressing. You were talking earlier about communication. One of the, how do I know how I feel right now? Well, one way I know how I feel is what's going on in my body is available in my brain. Another way how I know what I feel is by looking to the world around me and seeing how other people in my environment feel and reading that.
Yeah.
And that, just like some of what happened in this study happens beneath conscious awareness, this happens so readily that it can happen without conscious awareness. You mentioned earlier about that communication thing where you're training your your student therapists to be aware not just of how they massage, but how they communicate and all of that. And I've got if I can tell a short anecdote that I used to share with my students that I like and that I'm proud of. This one makes me look good. I can also tell anecdotes that make me sound like a fool, but this one makes me sound pretty good. When I was living in New York doing my doctoral internship, I used to go to this farmer's market in downtown Oneonta, and it was really nice. It was there on town square. And one day while I was there, I was minding my own business, and there was a scream behind me. And I turned around, and a woman was screaming, and a man, probably her husband or her partner, was laid out on the concrete, and presumably a moment before that he was standing. So it was a scary looking scene, and people flocked to it as you tend to do, and I almost did that, and I kind of caught myself and thought, okay, I don't even know what's going on. There's already people there. I'm not a medical person. Just stay out of the way, at least for now. But I kept an eye on it, and it wasn't clear what happened to the man, whether he'd had a stroke or had just died or had a heart attack. That wasn't clear. But what I did start to see is the woman, who was very distraught, was surrounded by people who were trying to attend to her. And what I saw was these people meaning to help her and making everything worse. So they were right up in her face, and they're like, calm down, everything's going to be okay. The ambulance is on the way. And, they were pumped up too. And at that moment, I saw this, and again, this sounds like, I did a great job. I just happened to be in tune that day. I was like, this isn't good, and I can do better than that. And so I did impose myself in this situation. And what I did is I got over there, maybe let's say half a dozen people around her in these agitated states trying to be good. And without saying a word, I basically nudged my way in and got in front of this woman's face so that she wasn't seeing their faces. And I said, what's your name? And she was kind of like, she's like, I don't remember what she said. And I said, ma'am, what's your name? And my whole goal in doing this was to have an even tone of voice, to have her see my face as calm, even though I was kind of upset too, but I was more calm than these other people. And I also had the conscious goal of keep these other people out of her. I'll never forget, there was one guy who had it in his mind that she needed to breathe into a paper bag. And he was like, and even after I was getting obvious results, I was asking, what's your name? Where are you from? What's your husband's name? Does he have a heart condition? These people tell me, I was getting results. She was coming down noticeably.
Yeah.
And paper bag dude is like, breathe into the bag! Breathe into the bag! He's like shouting at her, and I'm like, get out of here, dude. And a moment later, the ambulance came, and the man wasn't dead. I don't know what ultimately happened, but she got a ride to the hospital. So all I was trying to do was model a better emotional state.
Yeah.
And so I just told this long story, but the point being is how we speak, our tone of voice, what our face looks like, our posture. If I've been like this talking to her, versus like this, even though if you asked her later, what was that man's emotional state, she wouldn't say, well, I could see his shoulders were hunched. She wouldn't say that. But she would be able to report, oh, I felt really tense. Okay, so you understand what I'm saying. All these things, this is through mental processes, including maps. Your own map is affected by your map of how you see. So this is the kind of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, mirroring the other body language and what that's going to feel in you. And and those are easier ways to connect to massage than, it's harder to figure out exactly how this study connects. It's not totally apparent, directly. Except that it's more mystery, more some unconscious activity. But yeah, certainly those that you just
you sort of got me thinking in a more circumspect way about this study, which is good, because to me, when I read this, I kind of like really latched on to, wow, communication through haptic perception is possible. And I kind of like went, like just blue skies with that. Like that's amazing. And you kind of quickly brought me down to earth by saying like, okay, the task they're doing is a very speedy thing, and it's not really anything like what happens in massage. So I mean, we're both right that maybe haptic communication is possible, and then you're also, you're showing me some real limitations to that, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, I have all sorts of things that I could, analyze a study on, but they're not quite as fun as the implications to massage and the other things. So I don't know if they're really totally worth going into.
No, well, I mean, what I wanted to do with this was sort of as a jumping off point for exactly what we ended up talking about, sort of thinking about like, okay, what are the scientifically plausible, if still mysterious mechanisms by which, kind of transcendent experiences of massage occur? And, I think those transcendent experiences are largely what attract people to massage therapy, including careers in massage therapy. I think we all want to be able to provide those kind of experiences to people if we're able. And then I get dismayed when I see the leap from that to, I'm a being of pure energy who is, adjusting your chakras. I mean, I'm being facetious here, but I'm not way far. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that just serves to disconnect us from, so many other practices and professions. And I think we've got to start finding ways to, start finding how these transcendent experiences can happen through scientifically plausible mechanisms without taking any of the romance, or the romance is the wrong word, without taking any of the transcendence of that away.
Yeah. Well, without neuroscience, the explanations fall pretty flat.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still far away from a decent explanation if we could ever really understand it. It makes sense that people come up with those explanations that they do based on the models that we have right now in 21st century. And, they're a little better than we were 500 years ago, but without really understanding a lot of the things that have come out in the last 20 years in neuroscience, we wouldn't have a chance to really give a decent explanation. And I hope I'm around long enough to have better ones than we do now. I think a lot of the like the rubber hand experiments and the studies where you can create out-of-body experiences just in the lab because you're integrating various modalities of touch and vision. Maybe I should explain this to listeners. I don't know, but I think those have profound implications for how we think about who we are and what does experience mean. The idea that, I think, naive realism, this idea that whatever experience is actually happening is a problem. That the brain creates subjective experiences based on what's salient and what's relevant and what's important to pay attention to, and not necessarily what is real. So that's a really key thing for people to get, that salience is the most important thing. I think I mentioned to you once before about last year at our school we had we did EEG and EMG study.
I was thinking about that as you were talking, because I remember that paper, because I was the editor of the journal at the time he was getting it published, and I, in my duties as an editor, I helped with some of the details of the words escape me right now. I helped a little bit. I don't want to sound like I'm taking credit. The gentleman's name, Langdon Roberts?
Yeah. In California.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
you had him as a visitor, and he
taught a workshop, and we got to see what's actually going on in terms of muscle engagement. you see, muscles are on even when we aren't using them. There's activity there for various reasons, and we also looked at brainwave patterns during massage and before massage and after massage, and not enough time to summarize all that. But one of the really interesting things about that was that you could have electrodes on someone's shoulder, and when you go to touch their feet, instantly you have a reduction of activity in those shoulder muscles, and the client does not know that.
Yeah.
There's no relationship between a client saying they feel that their muscle relaxed versus the objective recording saying it does. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That there's not a relationship there. So I just think that somehow can fit into this study too about, we don't necessarily know what's going on. We have experiences, but
let's go further than that. We barely know what's going on in our body. Every moment of every day, there's all kinds of stuff happening in our body, and we don't have direct awareness of it for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to be distracted by what my pancreas is doing at the moment. Yeah. I want to be free to speak with you. So, I mean, and for anyone who'd like to look it up, Mark is describing a visit by a scientist named Langdon Roberts, and Langdon published some of the research that Mark is talking about in an article in the International Journal of Therapeutic Massage and Bodywork, and you can look up his study for free. There's no paywall. So if you go to ijtmb.org, you can access all the issues. And if you search within there for the study published by Langdon Roberts several years ago, you can look this up if it interests you. And it was interesting. I remember when he submitted it. It was several years ago. So look, I think you're really leading the way there. If you've got a massage school where you are looking at things like how massage therapy works and what does science, including the latest science, have to tell us about what might be going on. I mean, you are really you're really pioneering something there.
Well, that's the intention, is to be pioneering. You have to also fit within. Still have to learn how to take the MBLEX tests properly and stuff. So you have to find a balance between those two.
Certainly. But even working within the real world, you are, to do something like that is really pioneering. And in fact, I'll just say one other thing is, like, I remember, I'm sure you will remember it too. You took a couple of photos and you made sort of a very brief description of having that presentation at your school. And I think it was maybe even within my Facebook group, people are like, wait a minute, this sounds... Yeah. This doesn't sound scientific, and it really had everything to do with sort of your quick, casual wording. And I think you were even on your way to vacation or something. And the skeptics that I've helped train in my group to be like, so skeptical, are like, I don't know about this. This doesn't.
Right.
Yeah. We had to basically like call you out of vacation to be like, hey, explain that this was legit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the internet is, we don't know who everybody is until you know who they are. So you got to be careful with how you say it and who the audience is. And
well, we got it sorted out. So that was good. Well, anything else before we wrap it up?
Let's see. I have some notes. Let me just look in real quick here if there's anything else I was going to say. Well, I think that's mainly it. I was surprised. I have to say I'm surprised that no study like this has been done before. Two people working on the same goal. I mean, I agree with the authors that it's kind of weird that hasn't been done.
It's so basic. I wonder, I don't know how they came up with the idea, and they published this as this short report format in Psychological Science. And it gives you very little room to sort of say any background. And I say this from experience because I've published a short report in Psychological Science, and the rules are they will review your article faster, but you get one graphic and you get 1,000 words, and that's it. And 1,000 words, if that sounds like a lot to anybody listening, let me tell you, that is nothing. Because when we did it, when I described the study we did, I think I went through 20 rewrites of that to get it under 1,000 words. So yeah, I mean, the description here is just like, here's what we set out to do, and almost nobody's done it, and here's what happened, and that's it. Which is kind of great. I wish more scientific articles were like this. It's so much better than the opposite of, 8,000 words of bloviating on the you've ever thought of. It's like, just tell us what you did.
Yeah. A little more would have been nice, but I appreciate that I only had 2 pages to read to get ready for this.
Yeah. So this was a short and sweet article. The one I'll be doing next week with Tanya Velasquez is going to be really interesting, but it's also a much harder to read article with a lot more variables. So it's going to be an interesting contrast to go from this to that other one.
I'm glad I got this one.
Well, we'll do this again, and I'll come up with something harder next time.
Okay, that's fair.
Mark, I want to thank you for joining me and for taking the time to give us your time and your expertise on this, and also for coming in from the beautiful Hawaiian weather, and just as I had to do to come in from the beautiful Denver weather. Our friends are enjoying. I think it's only like 60, maybe 55 degrees in parts of Canada today.
Well, I think I can still catch some surf, so it's okay. It wasn't I didn't miss too much.
Excellent. Well, you enjoy the weather, and I'm sure no one watching this will be jealous of us. And we'll wrap it up there. So
and I want to thank you, Chris, for doing this. I'm so glad that you're doing this on a regular basis. I think this is really great.
Oh, thanks. And I almost forgot. I need to stick this in every time. I'm terrible at this part. But if you're someone who is viewing this and you support this kind of content, I want to invite you to visit my Patreon page. There's a link in the description for this video. And really, one of my goals is to make this project self-sustaining. I have no ambitions to get rich off of anything like this, but if I can sort of pay the expenses for internet access and things like that, that is really the only way I'm going to be able to develop this into something that's ongoing. So if you think that this is useful and you want to contribute, that is the mechanism by which to do it. So consider that. So thanks again, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Aloha.
All right. I'll see you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks.